The banksters who create money out of thin air as a debt instrument need more and more crazy ideas to assign the debt to keep the system going. Now, the banksters eventually know that the system will collapse under its own weight, but right now the system benefits them. So they want to keep the system going for as long as possible, which is exactly why we haven't had an economic crash in America yet. It's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. And that's because we've just exploded the debt. And we're maintaining that debt by maintaining the demand for the US dollar by meddling in all sorts of other countries that we shouldn't be messing in. It's just disgusting. I mean, Dan, how many people in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area where you live?
Uh, there's a lot. I know, let's just say St. Paul, where I work, there's like 200 and something thousand in that city alone. Now, I live out in the country,
Yeah,
but I do have the city, and I'm actually on the east side of the Mississippi. But there's a lot of people, and I think you're moving towards the mass immigration. Is that where you're going?
that's exactly where I'm going. I mean, is the general Twin Cities area about 3 million? If I'm not,
So
yeah, about
I, yeah, I'm not for sure. I don't know the numbers on it, Leonard. I just go over there and I work and I get back home. You know what?
well, I'm trying to give some context. I think the general Minneapolis St. Paul area happens to be the number of people who have been killed in this war on terror for the past 15 years. And that just gives us some context to work with here. So, if we're asking ourselves, what's going on with this mass migration issue? The answer is number one, we've been bombing the snot out of North Africa, the Middle East, and Eurasia for 15 years. Okay, you might want to get out of the area if you're getting bombed. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. And a case in point, NATO forces, led by the military industrial complex, have dropped 26,000 bombs in the world just in 2016 alone. So we hear about this terrorist bombing here and that terrorist bombing there. Multiply that by 26,000 divided by 365, and you get however many bombs that is per day. So it's no wonder why people are leaving those areas that are getting bombed. So, um, the goal of mass migration, which is being allowed, by the way, in case you doubt that last point, keep in mind that the residents of the Gaza Strip aren't being allowed into Egypt, and they're certainly not being allowed to any other nation. So there's an example of a population that's all boxed in, and they're not being allowed to emigrate to any other area. Okay, so if a nation really wanted to, it could block mass immigration into its nation. In other words, this mass immigration is happening by design. And there's no greater example of this than our illustrious uh, actor of a prime minister up here in Canada by the name of Justin Trudeau. Yes, I'm talking about a part time drama teacher, a part time snowboard instructor who never had a real job till he was about age 40. I'm talking about a trust fund kid by the name of Justin Trudeau, who was the son, or is the son, of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who ruled this country. And it's no coincidence that back in 1973, Trudeau, along with his Bilderberg bankster buddy, Gerald Bowie, basically killed the effectiveness of the Bank of Canada. And Gerald Bowie said, "We will embrace monetarism as a nation." What that means is we're just going to start getting into debt. That's so critical, Dan, because the financial history of Canada is like the financial history of America in reverse. See, we started in the 1930s with the Bank of Canada, which was a public bank. It issued loans or currency to pay for major things like the St. Lawrence Seaway and Canada's involvement in World War II at no interest. In other words, the Bank of Canada just printed up the money required for these projects to defend the nation and to grow Canada's economy, as opposed to private banks which issue money out of thin air as a loan to the governments of America and every other nation at interest. So that's public banking is totally different from private central banking. So, in other words, Pierre Trudeau and his Bilderberg bankster buddy, Gerald Bowie, like I said, really exploded Canada's debt. In other words, the old Trudeau, the old man Trudeau, was responsible for Canada's financial destruction, or the origins of Canada's financial destruction. Now the son comes along, Justin Trudeau, Mr. Trust Fund Kid, Mr. Part-time drama teacher, and he sends out these tweets saying, "Oh, we welcome all refugees into Canada regardless of your background." What an irresponsible statement to make. What are you saying, Justin? We're going to welcome anyone, like stray cats and dogs, regardless of your background? You're welcome to Canada? Come on. Why don't you take some of these refugees into your house on 24 Sussex Drive? But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, okay? The goal of mass migration is to create cultural division and dependency on the government. Mass migration is being used as a tool of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is the intentional transformation of a society from a Christian culture to a secular culture to a socialist culture. Politicians are trying to outdo each other in the name of tolerance, but importing intolerant people into your society to prove how tolerant you are only increases the intolerance in that society. Does paying someone to be with you increase that person's loyalty to you? See, this is what's happening. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 kids and you arrive with your family into Canada, you can literally walk across the Canadian border in full view of our Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who, by the way, Dan, I have video of this. You're not going to believe this. I'm going to incorporate this video right now, and I'm going to show you of our RCMP acting as valets to these immigrants, okay? They're helping them with their briefcases and their luggage, which, by the way, has airline tags on them. Okay, and by the way, these refugees, okay, meaning economic migrants, they've done their tour of 4, 5, 6 other nations, and on their way up to my province of Manitoba, they've passed through the desolate, war-torn suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul, where apparently you're going to get nuked any single day, and life is so oppressive in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm being sarcastic now, okay? That you have to go from Minneapolis, St. Paul to my province of Manitoba, okay? Where the RCMP will help you with your luggage crossing the border. You couldn't make this up. Okay, and then when you get asked 20 questions by the RCMP to prove you're not a bad guy, yeah, right. Like, what are you going to say? Yeah, I'm with Osama bin Laden. You know, you can get, Dan, I kid you not, over $40,000 worth of subsidies in your first year as a large family in Canada. Over $40,000.
Do you have any spare bedrooms up there at your house?
Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, up to
Yeah.
1998, I was a Christian school teacher. You know what my top salary was for full time teaching? Teaching all subjects at the grade 7 level, even being in Saturday school, leading some sports teams. Dan, it was $18,800 all the way up to 1998. But apparently, if I am an immigrant from the war torn suburbs of Minneapolis, I can just walk across the border with my large family and get more than double what I made as a Christian school teacher in my first year of tax subsidies. This is insane. We're paying people to move here that aren't refugees, they're economic migrants. Anyone should be able to see through this. But of course, if you don't like it, then you're a, let's see, intolerant, misogynistic, homophobic, transracial bigot, or whatever string of pejoratives they want to throw at you. You're a racist. Well, I'm sorry, but I thought Islam wasn't a race. I thought it was a religion. I thought you can be black, white, Arab, and be a Muslim. And over 90% of the refugees, meaning economic migrants, are all Islamic. And Dan, it's to the point now where in 2 years, just 2 years, there will be more Muslims at prayer in mosques in London than there are Christians in churches every weekend. 2 years.
Mm.
Okay? The cultural shift is now irreversible. The average Muslim immigrant has 8.1 children. The average birth rate for a European is now 1.6. And statistically speaking, as soon as you go below 2.1, you're below replacement rate. So, I mean, welcome to Londonistan. I mean, it's so crazy. We welcomed the Syrian refugees with a children's choir who were singing a song based on a song that Muhammad sung when he slaughtered Christians and Jews. And by the way, if anybody out there still insists that there's no difference between Christianity and Islam because the Christians and Muslims were busy slaughtering each other, okay, well, first of all, let me tear that apart very quickly. Number one, the Crusades were the result of the spread of Islam in the Middle East. Okay, not the other way around. Number two, by his own hand, according to Muslim scholars, in the Hadith, okay, you got to understand as Westerners, Islam is really an amalgam of three different things: the Quran, the Hadith, and influential imams' interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. It's a whole mishmash of things. I mean, I just rather stick to one text. Thank you very much. Okay. But no, you got to have like an encyclopedia of interpretations of the Quran, and then you got to have the interpretations of living imams' interpretations of the Hadith, which is an interpretation of the Quran. Unbelievable. Anyways, by his own hand, the founder of Islam, Muhammad, slaughtered 800 people in a single day. That takes dedication to chop off the heads of 800 people in a single day with a sword. I mean, you got to be going at it from sun up to sundown. So, if anybody says there's no difference between Christianity and Islam, Muhammad personally killed 800 people in a single day. And the only life Jesus ever gave up, as opposed to murder or kill, was his own. So you tell me if there's a difference between Christianity and Islam.
Amen. That's right.
Okay, so basically, intolerance, or the threat of being labeled intolerant, is being used as the defense against Islam and the mass migration of generally Islamic people into the West. And this mass migration is being used as a tool of cultural Marxism to change what used to be Christian societies, which became secular societies, which are now becoming socialist societies. And I can tell you that every single major practitioner of socialism in the past, like Karl Marx, you name it, they were all Luciferians in terms of, in being in the closet. They would never reveal that. So they were closet Luciferians, but they promoted secular atheism, because the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. So, on to the last topic, Zionism. Oh my goodness. This is the most explosive topic ever. So, before I even get into this as our last topic of the night, let me tell you what I'm not saying. Okay? I reject fundamentally the concept of replacement theology, which is the idea that the Christian church has somehow replaced Israel and the Jewish people as God's chosen people. No, no, no. We were grafted onto the true vine, not the other way around. Okay? God has never stopped fulfilling his promises to Israel. If he did, he wouldn't be God, because then he'd be going back on his word. So just because some, and I repeat some, in other words, a minority of Jews around the world are of the rather evil variety, there's no other way to describe it, doesn't mean I'm tarring and feathering all Jewish people around the world, past, present, and future, with the same brush. I'm talking about a minority. I'm talking about a satanic group. I'm talking about Revelation 2 verses 9 and Revelation chapter 3 verse 9, where it talks about there will be those of you who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie, and are of the synagogue of Satan. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, which detail the 7 periods of future church history. And I think it is no accident that in 2 of those periods, during the early church era and in the second last era, we have a synagogue of Satan, of those who say they are Jews and are not and do lie, being the primary agent of persecution of the Christian church. And I'm talking about not just the second period of church history, I'm talking about the second last period of church history, the Church of Philadelphia. And I would argue, as an amateur Christian historian, that the Church of Philadelphia, in terms of history, applies to the colonial church era up to and including World War II, where communism was busy persecuting at least 60 million Orthodox Christians, primarily in Russia, by the hands of secular, atheistic communists. And I'm here to say that no, not the vast majority, all of the major communist agents, like Leon Trotsky, whose real name was Lev Davidovich Bronstein, kind of hard to hide that Jewish heritage, okay, along with Karl Marx, along with Lenin, okay, they all had a prominent or distant Jewish lineage. There's the correlation between the Church of Philadelphia, as described in the book of Revelation, and the actual historic events of the Christian, Orthodox Christian population and its persecution is remarkable. It's dramatic. Okay? So, there is a group of people who say they are Jews and are not, and do lie, and are absolutely satanic. Like I said, and I keep having to repeat myself because this point is so sensitive. I understand that, okay? Like I said, I'm against replacement theology. I still believe that the Jews are God's chosen people. The problem is that modern Judaism contains the very elements of anti-Christian belief. Because when you deny Christ being the fulfillment of the law, then by definition, you're antichrist.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm glad to see you agree with that kind of logic. I mean, that's kind of inescapable logic. So, while God still keeps his promises to Israel, Israel is behaving in a way that is also heaping curses on themselves. This is why Jeremiah calls Israel a cup of trembling. As a historian, as a Bible enthusiast, prophecy enthusiast, I look at Israel and I just shake my head. I mean, take a book like The Transfer Agreement, written by Jewish historian Edwin Black. He clearly lays out, according to records which he accessed in Israel, this book was written about 35 years ago, that the Zionists, and that's what they call themselves, by the way, okay, Jewish supremacists in America made a deal with the devil. Jewish supremacists bargained with the Nazis and said, hey, you know what? If you let a significant number of Jews go from Germany and move them or allow them to be moved into Palestine, then we will drop we will drop our embargo against you, even though you're constantly saying that the Jews are the enemy. Okay, so Hitler had his own propaganda. He needed to create an enemy, and the Jews just happened to be the enemy in his mind. So again, these are layers of propaganda that we are dealing with here. So then you have the ultimate evil, which is the cooperation of the Zionists to create a state of Israel based on the Holocaust and the cooperation with the Nazis. So again, they say the definition of true love is sacrifice, and if you're really, really sick and twisted in your mind, you're prepared to sacrifice your own people to a large extent to get what you would never have otherwise, which is a Jewish homeland in the middle of the Muslim world. I think we can all agree that if it wasn't for the Holocaust, the modern 1948 state of Israel would have never occurred. And like I said, the Zionists did a deal with the devil. And it's hard to wrap your head around that, but that's what actually occurred. So, long story short, and this is tipping my hand as to some of the content in Volume 2, Jews have ironically and unfortunately and unfairly, have been associated with finance for a whole series of good reasons. Number one, um, if you were an Israelite back in ancient times, you were allowed to charge interest to a non Jew, but not to a fellow Jew. Okay? So, what that did was boost the Israeli or the Jewish economy. Then, thousands of years later, on the scene comes the Roman Catholic Church, and it says that charging of interest on any loan is a sin. Now, that's a problem if you're a banker in Europe, because the Catholic Church dominated Europe for at least 12 centuries until Martin Luther came along. So, Dan, who is the only one in Europe who's going to give you a loan? The answer is a Jew. So it's ironic and unfair that Jews became the pariah of Western society because they were the only one who would give a loan to people in many cases where the Catholic Church dominated. So that was, in general terms, why Jews have been associated with finance for centuries. So the Jews do have, as a people, a disproportionate affinity to the financial world. You cannot say that all Jews are money grubbers. That would be a bigoted and racist statement. But you can say that Jews have been unfairly encultured to engage in the world of finance. So that is why you will see so many Jews involved in the banking sector. People like Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. I mean, wow. He just plays the Jew card all the time. And this guy is such a ruthless businessman.
You are taking a position against the very security that you are selling, and you are not troubled.
Senator,
And you want people to trust you.
Senator, I think people.
Why would
trust
people?
us.
I won't trust you. If you came to me and wanted to sell me securities, and you didn't tell me that you have a bet against that same security,
Senator,
you don't think that affects my
Senator,
thinking?
And the worst example ever has got to be George Soros. This guy is Lucifer incarnate. I waited 7 years, Dan, 7 years off and on to get this alleged, supposed clip where George Soros was sitting down with a 60-minute interviewer, and he acknowledged that at age 14, he pretended to be a good Christian, and he sold out his fellow Jews to the Nazis for money. And he admits that on camera in front of a 60 Minutes interviewer. And he called that the defining point in his life. He said that it was totally justified because if he didn't do it, then somebody else would.
While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews. These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros's friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes,
Christian.
yes,
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
that's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there. None of that.
Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. In other words, whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator, the property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. So I had no sense of guilt.
Are you religious?
No.
Do you believe in God?
No.
You got to be totally sick and twisted and Luciferian to justify that, to operate that way. So the long story short is that George Soros has been selling the world out for money in a very sick way for 70 years. And even though he's wanted as a war criminal in several countries, he just keeps on going in America, because the powers that shouldn't be are disproportionately Jewish in name only, and are really Luciferians. They're actually giving Judaism a bad name. Kind of like some TV preachers give Christianity a bad name. Okay, it's a small minority, but they're there. They're on camera as these fake TV preachers, money grubbing, lying, nonstop for decades. Some of them, right? And they're giving Christianity a bad name, and that's how people like George Soros and Lloyd Blankfein, etc., keep operating. So I'm bringing this up because we need to talk about political Zionism, cultural Zionism, and religious Zionism. I defined what political Zionism was in Volume 1, and just as a very quick recap, because I want to close out here. My voice is starting to go. I've got this cold right now. So in the late 1800s, a Jew named Theodor Herzl wrote a book called The Jewish State, which advocated a homeland for the Jews as a result of the very real anti-Semitic persecution experienced by the world's Jews, again, primarily because of their involvement in finance. And the Rothschilds got a hold of Theodor Herzl's book and basically promoted it. And the Rothschilds initially wanted to establish a homeland for the Jews in Uganda, of all places. Now, that didn't pan out because ultimately God is in charge of history. And that is what always amazes me. He sits on his footstool and laughs at some of these plans, as the Bible says. So anyways, decades pass, and Lord Rothschild gets a letter from the World Zionist Federation and a royal operative whose name escapes me right now. And 30 years before Israel ever became a nation, says that we want to establish a home for the Jews in Palestine. Now, this is, yes, Arthur James Balfour was this royal person's name. Okay, he acted acted as the king's representative in Palestine. And he had many Masonic titles, by the way. So no one can ever say that, oh, the Holocaust happened, it's so unfortunate, and out of the blue, Israel was created. No, sorry, that's not how history works. Okay, there's a dark side to history. History doesn't just happen, it's made to happen by a lot of evil, sick people. So, Israel was created in May 14th, 1948. And basically, modern Zionism or political Zionism is the social movement which creates and sustains the physical nation of Israel. This definition is in the present tense because the territory of Israel is in a state of flux. And this definition is embodied by the Rothschild family. Not all Jews are political Zionists, and not all political Zionists are Jews. In other words, a lot of the Christian evangelical community has been, dare I say, fooled to follow Israel right or wrong. In other words, anything Israel does is always good. That's not what the prophets said. Okay, and in particular, these people tend to ignore the slaughter of Orthodox Christians in Russia, as I just went through.
Leonard,
Mhm.
I wanted to say this really quick. I don't want to throw you off, but I just want to say this. I want for the listeners to understand what Leonard's saying is, yes, there's some dirty dogs behind the scene that work this out. But ultimately, and Leonard, I think you would agree with what I'm saying. You are agreeing, and you did state it earlier, is that God has the ultimate say, and God does he'll use the bad to work out his own good. And if you don't believe that, look in the past, look in the Bible. Who do you think Judas was? He was a bad guy, but he was still used for a purpose. Caiaphas was a bad guy, but he was still used for a purpose. And I think that American Christianity is just like Leonard just stated, is we think, well, everything they do is good. We can't say anything about the Jews. Listen, we are grafted into the vine. We are the body of Christ. And we're grafted into the Jewish vine. We're all God's people now. We're not, and there are just a select few, and great example, just like those so-called preachers on the television collecting all that money, and it takes all that much money. I hear these podcasts all the time where we need $200,000 is all we need. Listen, folks, I've been doing web preach for the last 3 or 4 years, and we don't need all that much money. It's funded, and I'm not trying to boast or anything like that, but we take care of the bills, and you don't really need all that. Now, I get it when you go into television, but listen, I just wanted to state this once again. Leonard's not harping down on every single Jew. He's saying that it is some evil men behind the scenes that were working out an evil plan for their own selfish wills, their own selfish desires. But ultimately, God is in control. And when the people came back in 48, yes, I believe it was fulfilled Bible prophecy, but ultimately, and it was in the hand of a bad person, but still, God is still leading that person, and he's leading that way, just as he's using the enemy, number one, public enemy, Satan. He's using these folks too. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Leonard. I just wanted to get that statement out there so that nobody can come back and say, "What's he saying?"
Yeah, I get that all the time. You have to understand how a minority can influence the majority. Okay.
Yes.
Case in that is, I often try to describe Zionism by example. I say there is as much of a difference between a Jew and a Zionist as there is between a German and a Nazi. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does, right? Now, Nazism took over the German culture, but not permanently. And the reason why it took it over is because you had no choice. You are either loyal to the Nazi party or you get shot, period. End of discussion. Okay.
Well,
And
it's just like being an American and a Republican, and you have a Democrat. You have conservative, you have liberal.
yeah, exactly. But ultimately, and this basically winds down our topic of Zionism here. You have in the political spectrum, you've got far left and far right, not just right, center, and left. If you go far enough down the spectrum, the goals and the methods used by the extreme left and the extreme right are no different, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So, I mean, I just dropped my jaw at these quote unquote anti fascists dressed head to toe in black, smashing up everything and beating people to a bloody pulp if they say the wrong thing. But they call themselves anti fascists. I don't compute that. Okay. So, this is part of the Purple Revolution that we talked about earlier. Okay. This cultural revolution that has not stopped ever since Trump got into office. And so on the extreme right, you've got the neoconservative / fascist movement. And on the extreme left, you've got the neoliberal / socialist / communist crowd. And they're both extreme. They both demand that society fulfill their vision by force. If you don't like us, then we're going to bomb you, or we're going to sue you, or we're going to, pound your head in. And basically, Donald Trump is surrounded by a whole bunch of special interests. And like I said, I'm 80% now kind of leaning towards Donald Trump as being a product that we all bought. But that doesn't mean that there aren't influences within this sphere, competing visions, if you will. Okay. So on the far right, you get people like Bannon, who is a really, really nasty dude. And I'll leave a link in the description below this video of the Empire Files by Abby Martin, who takes a good look at Mr. Bannon. And just a word of caution, I don't subscribe to Abby Martin's political views at all. That doesn't mean that the facts she's able to bring up as opposed to her opinion aren't facts, because they are facts, because she goes to great lengths to demonstrate those facts. I mean, Mr. Bannon, he loves the conservative Christian crowd, but he was so abusive to his family. Boy, I could just go on and on about it. Then on the other side, you've got the ultra liberal / Zionist crowd, and by the name of Jared Kushner. Now, who is Jared Kushner? Well, Jared Kushner happens to be Donald Trump's son-in-law. Jared Kushner is married to Princess Ivanka. And I use that term deliberately because Jared Kushner is extremely manipulative and intelligent. If I were walking in a room where Jared Kushner was, not that I would because I'm not a millionaire, it would be easy for me to pick up with my personality and my powers of perception that this guy is a really manipulative dude. And he's not just manipulative, he's also a Zionist. And we've already defined what Zionism is. And how do I describe Jared Kushner? Okay, Jared Kushner, let me just give you some dots. And the more dots or facts that we have, the more of a, picture that we can paint. Jared Kushner is the son of Mr. Kushner, who was jailed for tax evasion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jared Kushner is obviously married to Ivanka Kushner now, of course. And Ivanka Kushner and Chelsea Clinton are best of friends. How does that work? Okay, when your parents are both number one and number two presidential candidates and you're best of friends, yeah, it could work. Okay, except it gets better. Chelsea Clinton is married to, I believe, Mark Mezvinsky. I know his last name is Mezvinsky. But just like Jared Kushner and his father, Mr. Mezvinsky Sr. was also jailed for tax evasion. You can't write this. I mean, if you were a Hollywood scriptwriter, the script would be rejected as too unrealistic. Okay? So, I mean, money grubbing runs deep in these families. And just as further dots, Mr. Kushner, Jared Kushner, just had to pay 2 to 3 times the going rate for, wait for it, 666 Fifth Avenue, which is right across from the Rockefeller Center. He could have had any other building. And by the way, 666 Fifth Avenue isn't exactly big. It's very opulent, but as a businessman, to overpay for something that you don't really need just because it has 666 in its logo smacks a little bit of evil intent, because you need to have that occult signature. And in case you still doubt this, you haven't seen all the dots yet. So Jared Kushner was also involved in a loan from Mr. Soros. Okay, that's to the tune of $250 million. And there's an article here I'm trying to reference. I don't seem to have it in front of me. Oh, well, I'll just have to go from memory. And basically, maybe I do have it here. Well, I'll have to go from memory. The name of this venture capital firm with George Soros's blood money, that's what it is Cadre. Well, what's a cadre? A cadre is a group of insiders. So just the definition of this venture capital firm advertises to those who have eyes to see that he's a financial insider. And here's where the Zionism kicks in. Syria is right next door to Israel. It's right on the border. And there are those within and without Israel who subscribe to the idea of greater Israel. Okay, it's called Eretz Israel. And these people, this minority of Jews, seeks to expand the borders of the present state of Israel. And the best way in their minds to do this is to sow all kinds of conflict within the region so that Israel is justified as being the protectorate of this previously foreign territory now in Israeli hands. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the proposed pipeline, which is favorable to NATO countries, runs right through western Syria, right next to Israel. And in case you think those are two dots that you can't connect, please keep one thing in mind. I had a series of videos called What is ISIS? Parts 1, 2, and 3 up on the web. And that started to get real good traction. About 250,000 views based on those 3 videos. And 2 of the 3 videos were taken down by YouTube for alleged copyright violation. When in fact, I've always been an educational channel and I've never monetized any of my videos. And one of those videos has a clip of an Israeli hospital treating some ISIS soldiers. Okay? Now, this doesn't happen by accident. Everyone on that hospital ward knew that they were treating some of these ISIS soldiers. And who was hanging around with John McCain when he was inside Syria for just a couple of hours? Well, the answer is a whole bunch of Israeli operatives who were trying to get ISIS going in Syria, trying to destabilize Syria so that Assad would no longer be in charge of Syria, so that America and Israel would be justified in protecting the peace and safety of particularly Western Syria. It's all a game. It's all about territory. And I'm telling you right now, a lot of the so-called jihadists are Jewish. Okay, they're actors. Just think about that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على نبيه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Muslim brothers and sisters everywhere, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu wa ba'd.
And that's one of the reasons why What is ISIS Parts 2 and Part 3 were taken down, because it really, really got a lot of traction. Anyways, back to Jared Kushner. So he's such a Israel firster as opposed to America first, that he visited the grave of Menachem Schneerson, who was of a particular sect of Judaism called the Lubavitcher sect. It's a sub-denomination of Hasidic Judaism, which is a combination of fundamentalism and mysticism. And so Jared and Princess Ivanka had to visit this gravesite of this rabbi of rabbis, this rabbi, however you pronounce it, and in order to seek God's favor. The problem is, when you look at some of the sayings of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, like I said, there's political Zionism, there's cultural Zionism, and then there's religious Zionism. Cultural Zionism occurs when you think that your culture as an Israelite is superior to any other culture, leaving God out of it. In other words, you have faith in yourself as a people group. And that has come around, particularly in the intertestamental period of about 400 years, when a lot of the Israelites went from faith in God to faith in the law to faith in themselves. And they still have that pride in themselves. Then there's one shade of Zionism called religious Zionism that's even worse than cultural Zionism and political Zionism. And I'm talking about religious Zionism. I'm going to give you just a couple of quotes here by this Rabbi Schneerson. And like I said, I'm not suggesting that all Jews believe this. I'm suggesting that a minority of Jews believe this. I could give you quote after quote after quote by Jewish leader after Jewish leader after Jewish leader. And when I see that schoolboy smirk on Jared Kushner wherever he goes, and he's always shadowing Trump with this schoolboy smirk, I know that he thinks too highly of himself. He's always got that smirk. So anyways, here is what Rabbi Schneerson, sorry, thinks of his belief in Judaism. Let's see. This is what needs to be said about the body. The body of a Jewish person is of a totally different quality from the body of members of all nations of the world. The difference in the inner quality between Jews and non-Jews is, quote, so great that the bodies should be considered as completely different species. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of white supremacists in the world. Not all white people are racists, but there are white supremacists, and some of these white supremacists actually develop a theology to justify their racism. And religious Zionism is no different. Okay, so here we go. As has been explained, an embryo is called a human being because it has both a body and soul. These are all quotes, by the way. Thus, the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish embryo can be understood. The general difference between Jews and non-Jews, a Jew was not created. You've got to be really, really arrogant, because what you're saying is that Jews are their own God. I mean, you just said that you weren't created. So what, you willed yourself into existence? Is that what you're saying? It's the height of arrogance, the height of self-righteousness. Let's see. Oh yes, the important things are the Jews because they do not exist for any other aim. They themselves are the divine aim. I mean, I could just go on and on. There's about 2 pages of quotes here, all by Jewish sources, by the way. And it is very heartening to know that more and more Jews are catching on to this, and they're rejecting this. Okay, I've referred in the past to a article by Sever Plocker called Stalin's Jews. And as an Israeli journalist, he just takes this, he takes the Jewish involvement in the slaughter of Christians in Russia, he really takes that to task. And Dan, you should have seen, or you should see, the hate mail that he receives on the part of his fellow Jews in Israel. It just goes on and on and on. So, these are the facts. Jared Kushner, just like of the Trump camp, just like the Clinton camp, has a father who was jailed for tax fraud, business fraud, and Princess Ivanka and Chelsea Clinton are best of buddies. Steve Bannon is an ultra right winger, and Jared and Ivanka are classic New York liberals who happen to be Zionists, who happen to be praying for God's delivering of Trump's victory at the grave of this Jewish supremacist. And yeah, it's not surprising that the Bannon camp lost, because Bannon's gone, and the Kushner camp won. So what does that say? I mean, who's real? You know, Voltaire, he's a secular French philosopher about a couple hundred years ago. I totally disagree with the philosophy of Voltaire, but he said something that is totally true. He said, if you want to know who really holds the power in a society, find out who you're not allowed to criticize. Yes, exactly. So this is what's going on in the world. You've got mass delusions or strong delusions. The entire monetary system is entirely fake. It revolves around electronic credits, as opposed to what it used to revolve around for about 5,000 years, which was gold and silver. And then 50 years ago, just after Kennedy got shot, it evolved around paper receipts. Then money centered around paper receipts, which have absolutely no relation to gold and silver, but those paper receipts for wealth were tied to the circulation of oil, which is exactly why the American empire will protect its one and only product, the petrodollar, at the expense of mass debt and mass death. And I think Christians and anyone else who calls themselves moral should recognize it for what it is. So what do we do with all this information? Well, I think a certain verse in 2 Timothy generally summarizes it quite well. The bottom line is, don't be afraid. Don't fall for this constant fear pornography. That's what it is. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and of sound mind. My whole mission is to not scare people. My mission is to empower people with knowledge that is scripturally based and get you to see the matrix for what it is. Turn off the matrix. There's only two things in this world that are real, and that is Jesus Christ and the Bible. And by the way, those two things are really one thing, because Christ himself is the living word. He can't help but fulfill Bible prophecies because he is the living embodiment of the Bible. And just as some people out there think that I believe in fantasy, well, if that's you, then you're going to have a hard time experiencing or explaining quote after quote after quote of people out there who believe in Lucifer. So I know that Lucifer is real. I know that Lucifer took pride in himself, which is the whole reason for his downfall and our downfall, by the way. And I know that eventually all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be killed by the New World Order in some kind of mass war, but it seems to me that if you're prepared for the next life, and if you don't give in to a spirit of fear, but hang on to a spirit of love, power, and of a sound mind, that you're actually prepared to live in this reality as opposed to the fantasy of chasing after fake money, watching fake news, and thinking that you're somehow doing God a favor.
Amen. Well, to sum it up, Leonard, I wanted to ask you, and I hate to drag it on for you, but how about, since things are moving so fast, how about can you give me your prediction for the next month?
Whoa, okay. Well, there's so many different war fronts. I mean, the Ukraine could flare up again. What about North Korea, Syria, Libya, Turkey? I mean, Erdogan's basically threatening the European Union with 5 more million refugees if he doesn't get what he wants. So you name it, there's about 5 or 6 different war fronts that could break out at any moment. So your guess is as good as mine. I mean, back in the Cold War, it was just Russia versus America. Now it's 5 or 6 different enemies. Again, wars and rumors of wars. Wow, does that ever apply to our age? We don't have one enemy. We've got 5 or 6. And
Yes.
yeah, we could have a financial crash at any moment only when the banksters want it to happen. And I think a war, according to their twisted philosophy, would be the best diversion possible, because then we'd all be looking at the war, and that would be used as a vehicle for the future crash that will hit America economically, and the attention will never be, the light of truth will never be shone on them who are creating this whole conflict to begin with. It's all about illusion and delusion. It's all about division. And I think we as Christians need to get together in a spirit of unity, because our little petty denominational differences don't amount to a hill of beans compared to what's facing us.
Amen. Yeah, and I'd like to say, folks, listen, you got to get out of the front of the TV. You got to take the earbuds out for a while, and you got to get into the Word of God, and you got to get into prayer. It's the only way that you're going to make it. In all honesty, you need discernment in the times that we live, and you do need peace, and you do need comfort, and you're not going to find that in earthly treasures. You're just not. You're not going to find it, but you'll find it in Jesus Christ. And if you don't know Him, I can tell you today that you should know Him, and you should seek Him in prayer and ask Him to reveal Himself to you in His way, and He will. Get into the Word of God, get in touch with a Christian, and get your head out of the television set and turn off all the noise and get alone with Jesus Christ. Again, Leonard, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. Great conversation, excellent points. As always, I have to go over it again and just let this stuff sink in. But it's real, and it's now, and it's going on, and we need to have our hearts right. And again, I'm Dan Roller for Web Preach, webpreach.com. Check out the website. Got some sermons on there. We just preach the truth on there. And Leonard, what's the name of your very first video again?
New World Order, Secret Societies, and Bible Prophecy. That's the name of the series. Volume 1 is called Wars and Rumors of Wars. Volume 2, which I'm more than halfway done production on, is called The Illusion of Money. So first is Wars and Rumors of Wars / the New World Order, because you have to introduce the topic. And then the second volume is The Illusion of Money. And then, Lord willing, volume 3 is Total Control. And then the final film in the series, hopefully sometime in the future, will be The Great Deception.
Yes, excellent. I definitely recommend volume 1. And like I said, I told Leonard that I converted it into an MP3 and I put it on my iPod or my iPhone, and I listen to it often because it's filled with such history, so great amount of information. You have to listen to it more than once. And I've had it for the last 5 years, Leonard.
It's becoming a very cult-like to you now.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, Leonard, God bless you. And thank you so much for doing all this research. I know you're a busy man. I know you're doing a lot of great, wonderful things. Want to keep your family in prayer and want to keep you in prayer, brother. And I just want to thank you again. Again, Leonard Ulrich, folks, and I'm Dan Roller for Web Preach, webpreach.com. Thank you for listening.